Hello, I'm Kelly Dobbs-Micus. I'm an organist and an editor with the ECS Publishing Group. We're happy to be joined today by Tom Mueller, who has a recently published organ work with ECS called Seven Versets on Wie schön leuchtet der Morgenstern. In English, How Brightly Shines the Morning Star. Welcome, Tom. We're glad you could be with us today.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
Tom is professor of church music, university organist, and music department chair at Concordia University in Irvine, California, where he directs academic programs in keyboard, composition, jazz, and church music. Tom also serves as associate organist at St. James Church in Los Angeles and is an active composer and recitalist. He earned the Doctor of Musical Arts degree at the Eastman School of Music as a student of David Higgs, and he also holds degrees from the University of Notre Dame and the University of Maine at Augusta. So Tom, let's start by having you tell us a little bit about your background and education as an organist and as a composer.
Sure. Well, my earliest musical experience was actually playing bluegrass. Both of my parents were bluegrass musicians, so I learned to play a lot of string instruments like mandolin and guitar and fiddle around the house by ear, just from observing them. And my grandmother was an organist, and she played in a variety of Lutheran churches, and really count her among my primary influences. So as I got older, got into my teen years and everything, I started playing the piano, and then once I was tall enough, playing the organ. And that's kind of launched me on my musical journey through things like folk music, but also a significant time playing jazz, which I have the opportunity to continue teaching here at Concordia, as well as classical and church music too. So it's really been wonderful to have the opportunity to dabble and pursue all of these different genres together. As a composer, thinking back to my earliest musical experiences, especially learning to play instruments by ear, I feel like that was just always part of who I was musically. I'd be learning a song or learning a piece, but at the same time, just coming up with different melodies or interesting harmonies, and sometimes arranging something that I'd heard, sometimes improvising at an instrument or trying to notate something. And so really from my earliest years, maybe when I was 5 or 6, I just remember kind of like wanting to create on an instrument. And thinking back, there were a lot of struggles early on with figuring out how to properly notate things, and a lot of trial and error and so forth. But once I started my undergraduate studies, I was lucky to be in a program that, although it was jazz focused, there were a number of composition faculty who had very significant classical music backgrounds too. And so I switched my major a few times along the way, but I eventually ended up doing jazz composition and performance. So that was really a formative experience for me as a composer, just to be connected to expert teachers and resources who could assist me in that journey, but also have the opportunity to compose for different ensembles and the different individuals around me, which, as any composer knows, is a very formative and important experience to have. And then ever since then, I've just kept it up as much as I could, even while pursuing performance and higher education and the other fields that I'm active in. I've been lucky to have the support of many folks who have commissioned pieces for me and who continue to perform my music. It's been a wonderful journey for me to be able to pursue composition in addition to my performance areas as well.
And it sounds like you've had a lot of very different influences all the way through that journey. So very interesting.
Yes.
Would you tell us a little bit about your new piece, Seven Versets? I'll let you pronounce that again if you'd like to, but
Yes, the Seven Versets on Wie schön leuchtet.
Right.
So the genesis of this piece came out of a conversation that I had with Bill Robbie several years ago, he and his wife Nancy are well known as commissioners of new liturgical music, especially in Lutheran traditions. And so we had been talking about this idea of doing something that was based on this hymn, which is a favorite of theirs. But when you look at the original text, which has 7 different stanzas, some of which are not commonly used today in modern hymnals, he suggested this idea of creating a multi-movement work that in which each movement would reflect the theology and the imagery and the affect of each of the individual stanzas, which was an interesting idea to me as a Lutheran church musician, because although we often sing Lutheran hymns in a reduced form today, where we might use 3 or 4 stanzas out of the original 10 or 12 or 16, they were intended to work together. So there's this theological train of thought that flows through all 7 stanzas of this original hymn. And so that, for me, launched some compositional thinking and investigation, and just really digging into what the text said and how that might start to translate into different musical ideas. So I really credit Bill with the initial germ of this idea. So as it ended up, the structure of Seven Versets is multi-movement, but it's also like an extended series of variations. So it sort of straddles this idea of being a theme and variations, a very common form in the classical tradition, with being like a larger cycle of what are essentially 7 independent chorale preludes, all of which are based on the same melody, but which reflect different facets of the original hymn text. So some of them are more meditative, some of them are more lively and extroverted. But within all of these movements, there's a lot of commonality that ties the form together. So there's some common motives, there's some key relationships that flow through them. So, in my opinion, it can be performed successfully as a concert work in its entirety, or it's also very easy just to extract individual movements, perhaps as a prelude or a postlude or another voluntary in a church setting.
Right, and another thing you mentioned about the work is that some of the pieces they take into account that French classical organ tradition of naming the movements based on the registrations.
Yeah, so for those familiar with the French classical organ tradition, there was this custom of composing sets of versets, essentially, that would be used at certain points in the Roman Catholic liturgy of that time. And in many cases, the style of these pieces was very stylized, and there was a strong expectation that a certain sort of movement would open the set of versets, or you'd have a certain sort of movement, like a grand jeu, that would close the set of versets. So for me, it doesn't always adhere to those models, but there's movements that use the registrations and also some of the compositional ideas of something like a plein jeu or a duo or a trio and so forth. So it's much more up-to-date harmonic idiom and tonal palette, but some of the genesis of the piece does lie in these ideas that come from 17th and 18th century French organ practice.
You recorded the piece, and that recording is available on the ECS website, and it's really a delightful recording. It will make you want to play the piece once you start hearing Tom play it.
Well, thank you.
Is there anything else you'd like to talk about that piece or its use? I was just thinking that it's primarily an Epiphany carol. Is that true?
It's in some traditions too, it's also used at the beginning of Advent, but primarily for the celebration of Epiphany. And I think for the practicing church musician, or even for somebody who's looking for recital pieces, because there's so many different movements here, all of which express different moods and have different levels of difficulty and make different demands on the instrument, I think that there's something for everybody in this set. So it's easy to take different movements and you could program them at a moment in the service that calls for something that's more meditative and softer. But if you're looking for a big prelude or postlude for perhaps a lessons and carols service or for an Epiphany service, that could also be of use. So there's some flexibility there.
Mhm. I thought I would ask you if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about your work on the board of the Association of Lutheran Church Musicians.
I'd be delighted to. So I've served on the board of ALCM for 5 or 6 years now. I started as a representative for Region 4, which is the Western United States and Western Canada as well. And I'm now serving as just a board member at large. But one of the things that I'm really proud of my work during my time with the organization is the focus that we've put on educational initiatives. So, ALCM is blessed to have many generous members and donors who have supported some of our scholarship programs and other educational initiatives. So I've, for the last couple of years, been chairing a task force that was developing new ideas for how to more effectively use our scholarship resources to help younger church musicians and those who are maybe need some support in the field or seeking more educational opportunities. So some of that is starting to bear fruit. This year we have, I believe, a record number of student scholarship applicants for our July conference, which will be held in Philadelphia. We're also going to be rolling out a new grant program that will support folks who might want to present something special in their congregations, or they have an educational project or maybe an educational opportunity that they could use some support for. So it's designed to be as open-ended as possible. But I'm really glad that we have these new programs that are getting off the ground, that we have some financial resources available for folks who need them. And my hope in looking across the larger landscape of the church music and organ world is that while we recognize many places in which scholarships and financial support are available for students, I think at the same time, we can all recognize that there are some gaps in opportunities for students, young working professionals. So my goal for the last couple of years working through ALCM has really been to identify these gaps in coverage and then find ways of supporting those needs in our community.
That's great. That's great work. Along those lines, at least a little bit, what can you tell us that you think is the biggest challenge facing younger organists, church musicians today?
Well, I love that question. And as a college professor teaching church music and organ and many related fields on a daily basis, I do feel like I have some insight into that. For me, when I look around the organ world and student organists that are active now, it's first of all incredible to see the level of playing that we see from young organists today. I mean, I would argue that the level of playing that we see from students in their teens and their 20s has never been higher than it is today, which is remarkable to see. However, recognizing the important role that church music plays in the professional lives of organists, I think we have to recognize that traditional organ performance programs in which students focus primarily on learning to play repertoire do have some drawbacks and limitations in the way that they prepare young church musicians for their future vocation. It's not necessarily teaching things like hymn leadership or choral accompanying or choral leadership or the sort of soft skills and administrative skills that you need to be successful in those roles. So I think for me, both as an educator, one of the things that I try to focus on and really represent to students is that there's this much larger skill set that you need to be successful in a church music vocation. And it goes beyond just being able to play repertoire really well. So we've made tweaks to our curriculum at Concordia during my time here to try to focus on some of these aspects. And I know this is a fairly common conversation that many colleagues and programs across the country are having now. I think another thing too, though, is that historically, when we look at the practice of church music and how it was handed down from teacher to student, it was often taking place in what was essentially an apprenticeship model. So, for example, you'd have an organ scholar who's at a congregation and they're working with a master church musician, or in parishes that are large enough to support two church musicians, you'll often have the primary director of music, an organist, and then perhaps an assistant or an associate who's earlier in their career. And I really think if we view those opportunities as learning experiences, essentially apprenticeships, we kind of see the value of passing down knowledge and skills in an actual working church environment, not necessarily an academic one. So as much as I can, I try to bring student organists here at Concordia into our chapel music ministry and really give them ways where they can meaningfully engage and see this process of leadership and organization and so many of the things that happen behind the scenes. You know, there's new initiatives just the last couple of years to support things like organ scholar programs. The AGO just rolled out a new program that's focused on this. And I've been heartened to see that more Lutheran churches in my own tradition are going this direction. as well as many congregations from other denominations too. But I think in this day and age, we need to recognize that that's a very efficient way for many of these skills and traditions to be passed on to a new generation. So I first of all urge colleagues and universities and large churches that might be able to support these programs to consider something like that. And then for students as well, I encourage them to seek these opportunities out, even if it's just for a summer or for a single season. You can learn so much in these opportunities. It was certainly the case for me, and I'm grateful to the mentors that I've had the chance to work alongside during my career. And the things that they have taught me and shown me, I put into practice every day as a musician and as an educator. So I'm grateful to have these opportunities, and I hope that they can be passed on to the next generation as well.
Well, it sounds like there is great hope at the university. Thanks so much for joining us today and telling us a little bit about your new piece, your new organ piece. And it was great to hear also about your work in education and also in church music. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.